I have been counting down my list of the top 10 best matches in SummerSlam history for the last 10 weeks, and we have finally reached the number one spot. But first, I have a list of honorable mentions that did not make the top 10 that are absolutely worth mentioning and are absolutely worth going out of your way to watch. And I think you should all add them to your watch list this week, especially if you've never seen them before. These here are in date order only. I'm not ranking these. These are also among some of the best matches in SummerSlam history. I just could not find a space for them in the top 10. But we've got 7 of them here. Hart Foundation against the Brainbusters from SummerSlam 1989. Inexplicably, this was a non-title match. The Brainbusters had recently won the tag team titles, and the titles were not on the line here at SummerSlam. And the Harts lost. Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart lost this match, which in his book, Bret says he and the Anvil were none too happy about. You know, it's bad enough it was a non-title match, but then for them to lose, it's like, where do they go from there? So they talked to Vince McMahon before the show, and they pleaded their case, and it was kind of a heated conversation. Obviously, they could not change his mind. Vince can be a stubborn person, I suppose, if all the stories about him are true. And so he had his mind was made up. That was it. But these 4 still went out there, and they had a hell of a match to open the show that year. Just a great tag team match. If you're a fan of tag team professional wrestling, then this is a match that you should go out of your way to watch. On that same SummerSlam card from 1989, also in the honorable mentions here, is the Intercontinental Championship match with Ravishing Rick Rude defending against the Ultimate Warrior. This was the best match of the 3. Actually, they had 4, now that I think about it. Their first match was at WrestleMania 5. That was where Rude won the championship with the assist from Bobby Heenan, and it really wasn't a great match. They had a match at SummerSlam 89, this one here, which I believe was the best of all the 4 televised matches they had. The following year, it was probably a year later, in July of 1990, the 2 of them had a match on Saturday night's main event. It might have been the Wild Kingdom or Animal Kingdom themed episode of Saturday night's main event. It might have been the same show that had that great IC title match between Tito Santana and Mr. Perfect. Anyway, from there, it built to a steel cage match at SummerSlam the following year, 1990. Following year from this match, that is. And the cage match, from what I remember, it's been a while since I've watched it, but it was a pretty good match, but not as good as this one. This was their best match together. Warrior and Rude had pretty good chemistry, and it was a distraction from Roddy Piper coming out and lifting his skirt up and showing Rick Rude whatever was underneath, that led to Rude being distracted and ultimately losing the championship back to the Warrior, who regained the title, which would be important because it built to a champion against champion title for title match the following year at WrestleMania. But this was a very good match. Warrior had his best matches with Randy Savage and Rick Rude. SummerSlam 1990 had a 2 out of 3 falls tag team championship match with Demolition, defending against the Hart Foundation. So back-to-back SummerSlams with 2 great Hart Foundation tag team matches, and this was also the best Demolition match that I ever saw. Demolition was my favorite tag team, and this was my favorite of all of their matches. This was the Smash and Crush incarnation. Axe had some kind of a heart ailment or heart issue that kept him from being cleared in wrestling, so he was there, and in fact he interfered later in the match. But he was not an active participant. This was when they did the 3-man crew of Demolition, which I was not as big of a fan of. And they just completely shit on Demolition altogether at the end. I mean, literally, you would go back and everything about them was different. The makeup of the tag team was, I don't mean literal face makeup, I mean just the makeup. It was Smash and Crush, and they changed their awesome theme song there at the end to some generic instrumental. Just awful, awful stuff. And they lost to Tenryu and Katao in a match at WrestleMania 7 because WWE had some kind of partnership with the, I want to say SWS promotion in Japan. So anyway, Demolition lost in like a 3-minute match to these 2 Japanese guys at WrestleMania that nobody in this country probably even knew or cared about. I mean, Tenryu was a big name, but nobody cared. And so to see how Demolition went out was really depressing. But this was just a fantastic match. 2 out of 3 falls. It built. Great drama. Legion of Doom, they were new to the company at the time. And they came down towards the end. They played a role in Demolition being distracted and ultimately losing the match. And the Hart Foundation became 2-time tag team champions that night. Skip ahead to SummerSlam in 1996. And the Boiler Room Brawl between The Undertaker and Mankind. It's one of my favorite SummerSlam matches. They had to wheel little tiny television screens on a TV stand to ringside just for the crowd to be able to watch, because this was pre-Titantron. There was no big screen for them to watch the match on. Now, maybe there was something up on top in the arena, but for the people sitting at ringside who were directly underneath whatever screens may have been above their head, this was the only way for them to watch this match on these tiny little shitty CRT televisions. It was 1996, okay, so this is pre-HD. But I can remember seeing that when Mankind and Undertaker brawled back to the ring at the end of their match, and you just saw these TVs in the crowd. It's like, wow. They taped the first half of this match the day before. So much like the Hollywood Backlot Brawl earlier that year at WrestleMania between Piper and Goldust, that was taped, that might have been taped a week in advance, but that was taped in advance, and then they kind of stumbled out in front of the live crowd once the match climaxed to make it seem as though they had just driven back to the building. In this case, they taped the match in the Boiler Room the day before, and when they were done brawling in the Boiler Room and they brawled out into the hallway and you saw all the wrestlers cheering them on and they brawled into the arena, that obviously was live. And it was just a knockdown brawl between these two guys who I still maintain that Mankind is Undertaker's greatest rival. And that includes Kane, and that includes Shawn Michaels and, Steve Austin and everybody else that you can think of. To me, Mankind is still the top #1 greatest rival. You talk about evenly matched. The first person to really come along with a dark character, kind of dark like The Undertaker, who really stood up to him and took the fight to him in a way that nobody else had before and was successful. Mankind beat The Undertaker, the King of the Ring, in just a straight match. Then they had the Boiler Room Brawl here, which, of course, culminated at the end with Paul Bearer turning heel, abandoning The Undertaker, hitting him in the head with the urn, and siding with Mankind, helping him win the match. That's 2 straight pay-per-view wins now by Mankind over The Undertaker before they even got to their Buried Alive match in October. I just thought this was a fun brawl. Maybe not fun for The Undertaker because he ended up getting a staph infection in his elbow, which doesn't sound like fun. But this was it was different, and it worked. And it was just a giant brawl between 2 giant brawlers with a big, shocking twist at the end. Paul Bearer and The Undertaker had been together for almost 6 years at that point. And probably getting a little long in the tooth, and so they decided to change things up a little bit and have Paul Bearer opposing The Undertaker. And so, if you've never seen a Boiler Room Brawl, I believe they've only done 2. Maybe 3, I think 2, in the history of the company. The only other one I could remember is in '99 they did one between Mankind and Big Show. And I don't remember if that was on TV or if that was a pay-per-view. It might have been one of the Backlash pay-per-views. So they have not done very many of these in the history of the company. And we go to SummerSlam in 1998. The Rock defending the Intercontinental Championship against Triple H in a ladder match at Madison Square Garden. A lot of people were very surprised that this match did not make the list so far, and were very upset about that. And look, that's what happens when you put a top 10 together, and it's all very subjective, of course. It may be on your list, but on my list, I didn't think that this rose to the level of the other matches that made the top 10, for whatever reason. Some it may be a case that there's better wrestling matches. In the case of Lesnar and Cena, which was a one-sided squash, it was just such a different type of attraction. And I enjoyed it for reasons that were very different than I would have enjoyed some of the other matches in the countdown. But I felt that was worthy of a spot. And I'll tell you right now, it came down to that match or this match. I was waffling. I was trying to make a final decision on what was going to end up in the top 10. Was it going to be this? Was it going to be Lesnar and Cena? I went with Lesnar and Cena. You would not be wrong if you went with this. This was a very good ladder match. Not the best ladder match. And Triple H was hampered by a knee injury coming into it, which I think only got worse as a result of him wrestling here in this match, to the point where he had to surrender the championship the following month. It got put up at a tournament, and Ken Shamrock beat X-Pac in the finals of that tournament. I know this because I was at the Raw show at the Nassau Coliseum where they had the final match, and Shamrock won the championship. But I remember reading that both these guys, Rock and Triple H, were being given cues. I don't know how deep in, 10, 12, 15 minutes in, but they were being given cues to go home. And they ignored those cues. And the match ended up going something like 25 or 26 minutes, which I believe was longer than it was originally supposed to. And I'm glad they did, because they ended up having a much better match. It's kind of like Shawn and Razor Ramon, WrestleMania 10. And I think Bret Hart even talked about this in his book, and it's been said that Shawn and Razor went way longer than they were allotted. And when they got to the back, I mean, everybody knew it was a classic match, but they were confronted by Randy Savage. And Randy Savage, who had wrestled earlier in the night, he was done, he was watching, and he chewed those guys out. I mean, he chewed them a new asshole, because there was an entire 10-man tag team match. 10 guys who didn't get a WrestleMania payday now because their match had to get cut because they ran short on time. So I remember hearing that story as well. I believe a similar thing may have happened here, where they went longer than they were supposed to. They said, we're going whether you like it or not. And they ended up having a great match. And here's the other thing I remember about this. I remember when the show was over, WWE for a while was doing this thing on the Home Shopping Network, where they would go live, and they would have a wrestler in studio, and it was on HSN, and they were hawking WWF merchandise. That's how big they were at the time. People were buying up all their merch. And I remember The Rock, fresh off losing the championship earlier in the night, he went on the Home Shopping Network. And I wish there was video of this somewhere. And he was just being The Rock, and it was entertaining as all hell. And I remember watching that, and just the things he was saying and the way he was acting, I'm like, he's like a babyface. I'm like, I wonder if he's going babyface. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. You know, it didn't take very long, a few more weeks, and this guy was coming out to like a rock star reaction that was almost rivaling the reactions that Steve Austin was getting. Which I guess is why they turned him, because you don't need two Steve Austins. So they turned The Rock and turned him into this big heel, and it worked perfectly, because you had babyface Austin chasing after the championship, and heel corporate champion Rock. It was just this great dynamic. But I do still have memories of him being on HSN that night thinking, this is the start of a babyface turn. This match actually helped get him more over as a babyface. The following year, SummerSlam 99, we had the Love Her or Leave Her match between Test and Shane McMahon, and that absolutely belongs in this list of honorable mentions. Yes, believe it or not, I am including a Shane McMahon match here in the honorable mentions of greatest SummerSlam matches of all time. And who knows, maybe, I'm recording this the day of SummerSlam 2019. He's got a match against Kevin Owens tonight. Maybe he'll end up having another Matt Classic. But this was a match that had no business being as good as it was. Test was still very green. He was still very new in the wrestling business. Shane McMahon wasn't even a trained professional wrestler in the first place. And these two went out there and had a very story-driven match. But the story they told, which of course was that Test had proposed marriage to his sister, and he wasn't very happy about this, and so he, beat up Test, and he had the Mean Street Posse, Rodney and Pete Gas and Joey Abs. I was going to say Joey Numbers. Joey Abs, I believe, was the other member of the Mean Street Posse. I don't believe Joey Numbers has ever lived in Greenwich, but I could be wrong. You learn something new about people every day. I can't picture that, but maybe. And they went out, and, again, it was like a very gimmick-laden match, and there was a lot of interference, and Patterson and Briscoe came in the end, and Test hit the big elbow off the top rope. It was just this dramatic match that the people were into, that, as a match, was pretty damn good. And Test got the big emotional win, and Stephanie runs out to the ring and hugs him, and she's looking down at her brother and is very, kind of disappointed, but she goes off with the love of her life. And I think back to this match sometimes and what might have been, what could have been. because Test was super over during this period of time in like the summer into the fall of '99. I know he was still new and everything, and you know, who knows? Maybe they were just trying to knock him down a peg. Maybe he got a big head or something. But after they did the whole reveal where Triple H married Stephanie instead, you would think, well, this is building to a Triple H and Test feud. I think they had a match on TV, maybe on Raw, but it never really built to anything. Like, Test got screwed over. His lady was taken from him by this guy. And nothing ever came out of it. Well, I mean, something came out of it, obviously. Triple H and Stephanie came out of it. But for Test, he got left in the wind. And he was never the same again after that. You know, he did the TNA tag team thing with, I don't mean total nonstop action. I mean the TNA team with Trish Stratus managing him and Albert. So he was a tag team guy, and then he left, I think, and he came back years later, and he was in the revamped ECW. Unless I'm imagining this, I believe he had a brief stint in 2006 in the new ECW, but it's just a shame what happened to him. Obviously, he died very young, but I really think they missed the ball with him, and they could have done a hell of a lot more, and he was very over, and it was just a big missed opportunity that they never did a big pay-per-view match with him and Triple H. Instead, they did Triple H and Vince McMahon. And finally here, my last honorable mention, before we move on to number one, is all the way we move forward to SummerSlam 2015. John Cena and Seth Rollins, champion against champion, title for title. The WWE title against the US title, winner take all. This was a great wrestling match with an absolutely horrendous finish of Jon Stewart interfering and hitting Cena with a chair lightly, which led to Seth Rollins hitting the pedigree and pedigree on the chair, I believe, and becoming a double champion. Cena and Rollins had great chemistry together. We knew this from earlier in the year. They had that great triple threat at the Rumble with Brock involved, and that was maybe the match of the year, or one of the matches of the year. And so here, one-on-one, they had a great professional wrestling match. Very dramatic. You know, it always helps having two titles on the line. And I could not find a spot for it in my top 10. I did for Cena and AJ, which was another great wrestling match with a finish that was not nearly as awful as this one. But yeah, that finish definitely took the match down a couple of notches. But if you're looking for a great wrestling match, you cannot go wrong by going back and watching Cena and Rollins here in 2015. So those are your honorable mentions.